4 years of fighting to keep our nation together. The date is April 14, 1865, and let's give a warm welcome to President Abraham Lincoln.
Well, thank you. Thank you. A good day, everyone. Oh, let's try that again. Good day, everyone. Good day. Now I know you're alive. By the looks of it, you cleaned up pretty well. You must have all had your Saturday baths, for which I'm very grateful. Well, I hear a couple of people didn't. I'll stay away from you. Well, I bring greetings to all of you from Washington City, where I live in the Executive Mansion. Some folks have taken to calling it the White House. I think because it's a White House. Yeah. And I bring greetings to you as well from my wife, Mary Lincoln. She sends her regrets that she wasn't able to travel with me today and visit with you. She really loves children. Would like to spend some time visiting with you and showing off one of her fancy dresses, talking to you ladies about proper fashions. Yeah, but she's busy today with her best friend, Elizabeth Keckley. They are out visiting homeless camps today. They bring them food, clothing, blankets, things they need to live in a homeless camp. They'll also visit the military hospitals, at least one. They visit those regularly, where the soldiers are recovering from their battle wounds, and they bring them fresh fruit to eat. They bring them fresh flowers for their pillows. They visit with the soldiers. They read letters to them. They write letters for them. So they're really very busy with all the things they do to help needy people around Washington City. Now, I have a question for you. I wonder how many here have ever heard of my wife, Mary Lincoln? Quite a few of you have. Yeah. How about Elizabeth Keckley? Anybody hear about her before I mentioned her today? Quite a few of you. Does anybody know anything about her? Not so many hands going up that time. Well, don't feel bad if you don't know anything about her. She's not a very well-known woman. But I will tell you this. I admire her a lot. To me, she's very, very special. And with your kind permission, I'd like to tell you a little story about her. Would that be okay? All right, good, because I like talking about her. Elizabeth Keckley was born a slave in Virginia. Now, she was a household slave. So where do you think she worked? In a house, of course. Now, as she was growing up, she was trained to be a seamstress. Does anybody here know what kind of work a seamstress does? Yes, sir. Sewing stuff. Do you know what in particular? Well, she might sew blankets from time to time, but mostly a seamstress sews what? Clothes and dresses for the ladies. A tailor sews them for the men, and a seamstress sews them for the ladies. Well, by the time Elizabeth Keckley got to be a full-grown woman, she was known as the best seamstress in the whole county. She was so good at sewing that her owner would hire her out to make dresses for other people sometimes. Now, I don't know if you know this, but when you hire out, you get paid, right? Yeah. Except if you're a slave, who gets the money, you or the owner? The owner. Now, is that fair? No, it's not fair, but that's the way it is with slavery. Slave does the work, owner gets the money. But there were some slave owners who allowed their slaves to keep a little bit of the money they earned working for other people. And Elizabeth's owner was one of them. So when she made dresses for people outside the family, she was allowed to keep a little bit of the money for herself. Now, when you have money, there's two things you can do with it, isn't there? Who can tell me one of them? Yes. Save it. And the other is to spend it. Yeah. Now, are there a lot of ways to spend money? Oh, there certainly are. And there's a lot of ways to save money, too. But when it all boils out in the wash, whatever you do with money, you're either spending it or you're saving it. Now, sometimes you'd like to have something that requires more money than you have at the moment. What's the proper thing to do? Yes, sir. Save until you have enough, yes. Don't be like my stepbrother, John D. Johnston. He's lazy. He is. He likes the spending part, but not so much the earning part. So he goes out and spends money, and then he writes a letter to me asking me to send him money to help him pay his bills. Can you imagine such a thing? You can? Oh. Well, every time he does that, I write him a letter back and I say, get a job, earn the money first, then spend it. Does that make sense? Of course it does. And if you can remember that, you'll save yourself a lot of headaches later on. Yeah, that's right. Well, Elizabeth Keckley wanted something. Actually, she wanted a lot of things, but there was one thing she wanted more than anything in the whole world. Can anybody guess what it was? Yes. To not be a slave. Yeah. Well, she went to her owner, and they talked about it. And her owner told her that if she saved enough money, she could buy her freedom. You think she started saving? You don't think she did? Oh, yeah, she did for sure. Now, I have a question. Have your parents or your teachers here ever talked to you about something called patience? Do they wish you had more of it? Yeah, otherwise, why would they bring up the subject, huh? Yeah. Well, how about perseverance? Can anybody tell me what it means to persevere? Yes. To never give up. Exactly right. Well, Elizabeth Keckley needed a lot of patience because it took her nearly 12 years to save up enough money to buy her freedom. 12 years. You can't even imagine how long that is. You haven't lived that long yet. Well, some of you have. I mean, these old people sitting in the chairs, you think they're at least 12 years old? Yeah, I think so. And there were people who did not want her to get her freedom. And they tried all kinds of things to stop her. And she could have quit. She could have just given up and said, you know what, this is way too hard. It's going to take way too long. I'll just stay being a slave because that's just kind of the way things are. But she didn't. She did not give up. She kept working hard. She kept saving her money. And eventually she got enough. She bought her freedom. She moved to Washington City. She opened up her own sewing shop. And now she gets to keep all the money she earns working for other people. Is that fair? Yes, yes, it is. Well, when we went to live in the executive mansion, Mrs. Lincoln decided she needed more new dresses. Women are like that, aren't they? At least Mrs. Lincoln is. And she needed a seamstress. And she didn't want just anybody. After all, she's the wife of the president. She's living in the White House now. So she wanted nothing but the best. So she began interviewing people for the job. And she interviewed a lot of women, including Elizabeth Keckley. And when she saw the quality of Lizzie's work, why, she just was so impressed, and she hired her right there on the spot and said, "You will be my full-time seamstress." And they have since become the best of friends. So you see, here was a woman who was born a slave. And because she was willing to work hard and save her money, and she never gave up on her goal to be free, she eventually got that freedom. And now she's a very successful businesswoman in Washington City, making dresses for the finest ladies in town. Yeah, could be a lesson there maybe. Well, as for me now, I was born in a log cabin on a farm near Hodgenville, Kentucky, on February the 12th in the year of our Lord, 1809. Have you ever heard of a man by the name of Thomas Jefferson? Yeah, most of you have. Who can tell me something about him? Yes. He was our third president. Who was our first? George Washington. Our second?
Adams.
That's right, John Adams. Very good. And Thomas Jefferson was our third. I mention his name because he was the president when I was born. And I'll tell you something else. When I was born, our country was a whole lot smaller than it is today. We had only 17 states in our country when I was born. 17, that's all. You know where the Mississippi River is? When I was born, we had no states west of the Mississippi River. None. That was all wild country out there. Some folks say it still is, but here it is, 1865. We now have 36 states in our country, and we go as far west as California. That's a long way off, and there's a lot of folks wonder how it is, why we have a state that far away. It's a 6-month journey by wagon train to get there. 6 months. And in between here in California, there's a lot of wide open territory. Every year, there's hundreds of families moving out there to settle that land. I'll tell you, I wouldn't be surprised if the day comes when all that territory gets divided up in the states. We could have as many as 50 states someday. Now, that won't happen in my lifetime, but maybe yours. Now, when I was born, we had 2 kinds of states in our country. Slave states in the South, where they allow slavery, and free states in the North, where we don't. Now, I was born in a slave state, Kentucky. But my family did not own slaves. For one thing, we were too poor to own slaves, and for another thing, my father hated slavery. I remember how he talked about it so often, about how wrong slavery is. He said, if slavery's not wrong, nothing's wrong. And so it was. When I was about 7 years old, we left Kentucky, moved across the Ohio River to the brand new free state called Indiana. Ever hear of that place? Yeah. Yep, Indiana. We settled in the southern part, a place called Pigeon Creek. Pigeon Creek. I'll tell you, we weren't there very long, and we discovered why they called it Pigeon Creek. You know anything about pigeons? Well, we learned to be very careful looking up, I'll tell you. And it was wilderness out there. No town, no stores, hardly any roads to speak of. Very few people, maybe a half a dozen families were living in the area where we moved to. We had to cut our way through the forest to get to the land that my father bought. We had to cut down trees to build a cabin. We had to clear land to plant crops. You know, there were no place to go to buy food. So we had to grow all of our own vegetables. My father went hunting and fishing and things to get meat. And we'd go pick berries out of the forest, and we had fruit trees and all. You like to eat during the winter? How many like to eat during the winter? My goodness, we got some old people here didn't raise their hand. You know, you ever notice that the older you get, the harder it is to get that hand up in the air? Yeah. Well, can you grow vegetables during the winter? Well, neither could we. And since there was no place to buy food, we had to grow enough vegetables in the summertime to have enough to eat during the winter. So from early in the spring, as soon as the snow was all gone and the frost was out of the ground, we're out there with the horse and the plow, and we're tilling the ground, and we're raking it, and we're hoeing it, and getting it all ready to plant seeds. And then we had to plant all those seeds by hand: corn and taters and pumpkins and squash and rutabagas and turnips and onions and carrots and beets and peas and beans and just all kinds of vegetables, acres of them. Now, you know how it is. When those vegetables start coming through the soil, when the seeds sprout and they start growing up, what comes up along with the vegetables? Say weeds. Yeah, weeds. And you got to pull the weeds, right? Otherwise, they smother out the vegetables, and then you got nothing to eat. So we're out there pulling weeds every day. And then after the vegetables had grown, then we had to pull up all those carrots and all those onions and all those beets and rutabagas and turnips and everything, and pick the beans and the corn and everything, and get everything ready for winter storage. So much of our time was spent doing work so that we had enough food to eat. I had hardly any time to go to school. I went to school by littles, a little bit here, a little bit there. If you were to add up all the time that I went to school, it's less than 1 year. Don't get any ideas. See, I had to do most of my learning by reading books. And I love to read books. I learned about places I'd never been, people I'd never met, just by reading books. And as a boy growing up in Indiana, I read all the books I could lay my hands on, but I'll tell you, in the wilderness, there weren't very many. But we did have some good ones, like Aesop's Fables. How many of you have read Aesop's Fables? Isn't that a good book? Yeah. My favorite story in there is the one about the tortoise and the hare. Yeah. And we had a Bible in our house. My mother used the Bible to teach me how to read, and I still read that book every day in the White House. And we had Pilgrim's Progress, and we had, the Arabian Nights. How many have read the Arabian Nights? Yeah, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, Aladdin and his Magic Lamp, Sinbad the Sailor. Love those stories, wonderful adventure stories. And then I'd borrow books from the neighbors sometimes, too. I remember walking as far as 4 miles to borrow a book I hadn't read yet. Well, now things were going along pretty good there in Indiana. Crops were doing well. We had plenty of food to eat. People were moving in. The community was growing. Some of my mother's relatives came to live nearby. And one day, those relatives got sick. Now, it's no fun being sick, is it? No. And in the wilderness, we did not have a hospital. The closest doctor was 40 miles away. We had to make up our own medicines. Sometimes they didn't work. We had to help each other when we were sick. So my mother went over to help the relatives try to get better. But they died. And then my mother got sick, and she died. She was only 35 years old. I was 9. My sister was 11. And it was very sad. We about broke our hearts. That winter in that cabin was a long and lonely one without our mother there. We missed her so much. We missed her cooking for sure. We missed her laughter. We missed her hugs every night before we went to bed. And of course, the work still needs to be done, so besides our own chores to do, we had to do our mother's chores now as well, and it wasn't working very good for two young children, I'll tell you that. And our father could see plainly that we needed a mother. So the next year, he went back to Kentucky to get himself another wife. And there was a woman there that he used to know named Sarah Bush Johnston. She was a widow. Her husband had died, left her with 3 young children to take care of. They needed a father. My sister and I needed a mother. So my father went to her house in Elizabethtown and he knocked on her door. When she opened it, he said, "Well, howdy, Sarah, would you like to get married?" He was so romantic. Yeah, well, he believed in short courtships for sure, and she said no. Well, it seems that when her husband died, she was left with a bunch of bills to pay. And she didn't think it was right for a woman to marry a man and then expect him to pay her bills. But he needed a wife. He needed a mother for his children. So he said to her, "I have the money to pay your bills. I'll gladly do it." And so he did, and they got married. Loaded up all her goods in a wagon, loaded up the 3 children, headed across the Ohio River to our 1-room cabin in Indiana. You think we were crowded? Yeah. We could put, I'm going to say 1, 2, we could probably put 6 of those cabins in this room and have space left over. Our cabin had 1 window without any glass, just a piece of heavy paper soaked with oil to keep out the rain and the snow. 1 door held on with leather hinges, and the floor of our cabin was packed dirt. That was our house. Now, the first thing my father did was to build a loft in the cabin for us boys to sleep in, and that was kind of nice. That gave us extra room. And my stepmother wanted a wood floor in the cabin like the house she had in E-Town, so he stopped his hunting long enough to put in a nice wood floor. She made curtains for the window and all, and it was getting to be a pretty nice place to live, compared to what it used to be, of course. But I still missed my angel mother. But over time, I grew to love my stepmother. She was a very kindly woman. She treated me as though I was her own son. And she was a good cook, too. That's important to somebody who likes to eat, right? Yeah. And she understood my humor, which was a good thing for me because I like to play practical jokes once in a while. Anybody here like practical jokes? Uh-huh. Would you like to hear one? Yeah. I'll tell you my favorite one. But I have to warn you first. If you do this at your house, you will get in big trouble with your mom. I know from personal experience. It was in the springtime. Weather was getting warm. We're running barefoot outside. See, we wore shoes only in the winter months when I was a boy. It had rained the day before. Now, you know what rain does to dirt. Makes mud. Yeah. Now, how many here have ever walked in the mud barefoot? Yeah. Isn't that fun? I mean, all that mud squishing up between your toes and everything. I mean, it's a if you haven't done it, you haven't lived. That's just the truth of it right there. Well, so here we were. My stepbrother and I were out walking in the mud barefoot this one day. Our mother had just finished scrubbing the cabin floor. You know, she was off to visit a neighbor, and she stopped on the path, and she said to me, she said, "Abraham, I don't want you and your brother now tracking mud all over my clean floor." I promised that we would not do that. And she left. Well, then I got an idea. I took my brother up to the house. Now, I had made a promise to my mother, didn't I? I did not want to break that promise. I was old enough to understand that you do not break promises to your mother if you want to live. And you don't break them to your father either, but I had made this one to my mother, so I washed all the mud off of my feet. And then I picked up my little brother and I carried him inside the house. And I turned him upside down, and I got his muddy feet up in the air. And you know where we put footprints? On the ceiling. Yeah, we put them everywhere up there. It was great fun doing it. And then you know what happened? Our mother came home. Well, you knew she would. I mean, otherwise, what's the point of putting the footprints up there? And I'll tell you, she walked into that cabin, and she looked up at that ceiling. She was not a happy woman. She called out my name, Abraham! You come here this minute? You know what happens at your house when you hear that, right? Uh-huh. Well, she had two questions for me. First off, she wanted to know how those footprints got up there. Well, I thought it was kind of a funny question myself, because anybody could figure out how they got up there. But you know how mothers are. They want to hear your side of the story, don't they? And you might as well tell them the truth, because if they haven't already figured it out, they soon will. So I told her just exactly how we did it. But then she asked me the second question. Why did you do it? You ever notice how difficult that question is to answer sometimes? Yeah. And it doesn't matter how old you are either. Yeah, well, I said to my mother, you told us not to track mud on the floor. You said nothing about the ceiling. Well, we all had a big laugh about it, and then guess who got stuck cleaning that ceiling? Yeah. Then I wished we hadn't put quite so many footprints up there, so be warned. Yeah. Well, some years later, my father heard about some really good farmland in Illinois. So we sold the farm in Indiana, packed up all our goods, and we headed west. And when we got there, I helped my father build a new cabin for the family. I helped him split some rails to fence off the farm, and then I left home. I was 21 years old now. I was tired of the farm work. I didn't want to do it anymore. You know, my father taught me how to work, but he never taught me how to like it. And I just decided I was going to do something other than farming. But I wandered around. I worked various jobs, lived in various places. And then I settled in the town of New Salem, Illinois. And there I had a store, but it winked out after a while. I was a postmaster for a time. I was a land surveyor. You know, he's a person that lays out towns and roads and such. And I was even a soldier for a spell. I signed up to fight in the Black Hawk Indian War of 1832. And as it turned out, we didn't fight any Indians, but we did have some bloody battles with the mosquitoes. And you know, they usually win. And then when that was all over, my friends and neighbors elected me to represent them in the state government. Now there I met a man by the name of John Todd Stewart. And one day, and we became friends. And one day he came to me and he said, Lincoln, I've been thinking. You'd make a good lawyer. How about if you study the law? I said, well, Stewart, I'd like that very much. But, you know, I've had only 1 year of schooling. I have no money to go to law school. How am I going to study the law? You know what he said? Read books. He went to his bookshelf, got a couple of his law books, and he handed them to me, and he said, here, study these. Read these books over and over until you know every word in them. And when you're done with these two, come back and get some more. And I did. For the next 3 years, I studied his law books. I read those books over and over and over. I read those books when I was riding the horse. I read those books when I was sitting under a tree enjoying the summer sun. I read those books as I'm walking along. And after 3 years, I knew enough to get a license to be a lawyer. I moved to Springfield, and Mr. Stewart made me his partner. And I worked very hard to be a good lawyer and got to be pretty fair at it. But I'll tell you, I didn't work all the time. I mean, you know that. You can't work all the time, can you? Now, you got to have some playtime, don't you? And no? Who said no? Keep him working. Then he'll find out that he needs playtime. Yes, indeed. Well, as a lawyer, I would get invited to various social functions around town. You know, parties and dances and soirees and levees and such. And I remember a dance I went to one night. I remember it because it was there that I met the prettiest girl in all of Springfield. Her name was Mary Todd. She was pretty. Short, she's only 5'2", I'm about 6'4", but she was a pretty thing. And I remember walking in that night, and there she was, just as pretty as you please, in her beautiful ball gown. She's sitting over there on the other side of the room with her friends, and they're talking to one another, and I wanted to dance with her so bad. But I was afraid to ask her. Because you see, Mary Todd was rich. She was from the Todd family of Lexington, Kentucky. She grew up in a house that had 14 rooms in it. 14! I grew up in a one-room cabin. And now I had less than 1 year schooling. She had more than 10, and she could speak French. Oh yeah, she was an educated woman, all right. And I was afraid that if I asked her to dance, she'd turn me down. And all night long, my friend said, get over there and ask her. And I said, no, I'm scared. Well, I was. And finally, one of them said, Lincoln, if you don't get over there and ask her, I'm going to do it for you. Oh, I couldn't have that. So I got up from the chair I was sitting in, and I walked across the floor. It was a long walk, I'll tell you that. And I got over there to where Mary and her friends were sitting, and all their conversation stopped. They stared at me. They give me that look, as if they're saying, why are you here? Well, I ignored them. I looked at Mary and I said, Miss Todd, I would like to dance with you in the worst way. Well, to my surprise, she offered her hand. We went out on the floor and we danced and we danced. And when the music ended, I escorted Miss Todd back to her seat, as a gentleman should. Yeah. And I said, thank you very kindly, miss. I turned to walk back to my friends, and I heard one of her friends say, Mary, did Lincoln dance with you in the worst way? You know what she said? Yes, the very worst way. So I'm not a dancer. But of course, there's so much more to life than dancing. And Mary Todd and I went on to become very good friends. Well, the truth of it is, even though her family did not like it very much, we became husband and wife. Now, don't worry, you'll get used to it someday. Yeah. Well, and over the years, we had 4 sons. Our oldest boy we named Robert, after Mary's father, Robert Todd. Our second boy we named Eddie. But sadly, little Eddie did not live to see his 4th birthday. He died of consumption when he was 3 years old. That's a lung disease, and it was very sad. It was very sad to see him struggle so much for almost 2 months before he finally gave up the ghost. But then later that year, the Lord blessed us with our third son, Willie. And then our fourth boy we named Thomas, after my father, Thomas Lincoln. But we hardly ever call him Thomas. See, when Thomas was born, he had a large head and a long, skinny body. You know what tadpoles look like? Yeah. Yep, we nicknamed him Tadpole. And we've called him Tad ever since. Yep. And Tad and Willie, those two boys, they became best friends and playmates, mischief makers. Those two boys could get into more shenanigans than any two boys I'd ever seen. You know, I took them to my law office one time. They decided to play stickball with a broom handle and an ink bottle. Yeah, well, you can imagine the mess when that ink bottle broke. My law partner wanted to wring their necks, but I wouldn't let him. And then I could tell you stories about those two boys for the next hour, but we don't have that much time. But I'll tell you this one. Shortly after we moved into the White House, Mary Lincoln, my wife, Mrs. Lincoln, she organized a tea party for the ladies of Washington society. So there they were in the East Room of the White House, in their beautiful dresses, and they're sitting there and they're sipping their tea, eating their French pastries and their fancy sandwiches and enjoying good conversation. Suddenly they heard a noise, and they looked over to the door. And there in the doorway sat Willie and Tad on chairs being pulled by their pet goats. Yeah, right there in the White House. They cracked their little whips. Those goats took off, pulling Willie and Tad right through the middle of all those ladies. It was a mess to behold, I'll tell you. There was tea going one way, food going another way, and ladies going everywhere. Mrs. Lincoln was not a happy woman, I'll tell you that. And then, of course, we have this war going on. And we have soldiers all around the White House. Willie and Tad wanted to be soldiers. But of course, they're too young to be real soldiers, but we had uniforms made for the boys, and one for their doll, Jack, so they could play soldier. Now, every day, I walk over to the War Department to check the telegraph messages from the generals to see the progress of the war. And this one day, I'm walking back to the White House, and I walk through the backyard to look at the beautiful flower gardens back there and breathe in all those pretty flower smells and all. When I did that, I spotted Jack buried up to his neck in the flower garden. And I thought that was just a little bit strange. So I dug him up, and I went and found the boys, and I asked about it. And they said, well, Papa, Jack was caught sleeping on guard duty, and you know the penalty for that is death. Well, that's true. You see, in the Army, guard duty is a very important job, especially at night when the soldiers are trying to get some sleep. Somebody has to stay awake in case the enemy comes sneaking in. Well, if that guard falls asleep, the enemy can just walk right in and take over. So the penalty is to be shot. Well, I've signed hundreds of pardons for soldiers who are to be shot for that very reason. So I told the boys, if that ever happens again, just come and see me. Didn't take but a few days. I was in the middle of a meeting. Door burst open. There's Willie and Tad demanding a pardon for Jack. He'd been caught sleeping again. And they would not leave until I got out a sheet of paper and I wrote on it, Jack, the doll, is hereby pardoned by order of the President. And they left. And I thought that'd be the end of it. Not with these boys. About a week later, we found Jack hanging from a tree in the backyard. Poor Jack. But those were our boys. But sadly, Willie and Tad did not have a very long time to play together in the White House. We were there less than a year, and the boys became very ill with typhoid fever. Now, Tad survived it, but Willie died. He was 11 years old, and it broke our hearts. We loved that boy so much. And now, that big white house that had been so full of laughter and giggling and the playing of the boys and their friends felt like an empty tomb. It was so quiet. Now, it's customary when someone in the family dies that the ladies wear black dresses for about a year or so. Mrs. Lincoln wore black for nearly 2 years after Willie died.